Darn, I thought I was going to make a cool video, but they'd all require money when you buy them online. Oh well. So I'll do a talking head video. Um, there is a different approach to alcohol abuse habit. One approach, the common medical establishment approach, if you want to subscribe to their authority and their commerce, is to address the brain, the GABA receptors in the brain, and to substitute some pharmaceutical medication in place of the alcohol, which of course the body gets used to, as we all know, and then it doesn't work. Then there's the mechanical approach. Now that's the result of alcohol abuse, is the experience in the brain, the neurotransmission of experience. But the cause is in the gut, where it all gets absorbed. And wouldn't you know it, there's a simple mechanical technique, shall we say, to obstruct this absorption of alcohol, and it's called wax. Now, we don't have enough wax in our diet to really amount to anything, although if you ate orange marmalade or you made use of lemon zest in your cooking to any degree, then you'd be getting some plant wax, because there's some naturally occurring wax on the surface of citrus fruits. Of course, when you buy it conventionally grown, they add wax. But if you buy it organic, then you just get the natural wax that's already there. Now, if you want more wax to get more results, you turn to beeswax or some other edible plant wax, and you melt it in a double boiler with oil or butter, lard, whatever, and it diffuses into the oil. You stir it up, and now you've got something akin to margarine, in which you can change the density of the end result, the product, by changing the proportionality ratio between the wax and the oil, depending on whether you want it to be solid at room temperature or only when it's in the refrigerator, yada yada. Now, I normally don't add a whole lot of beeswax to oil when I mix the two, such that it becomes like a pudding consistency, the consistency of pudding, especially when it's in the refrigerator, because I want to take it out and take a scoop on a spoon and eat it right away, because I'll put other things in it, like nano-sized particles of silver, or I have one mixture that's cayenne, African bird pepper. Oh my God, that thing is hot when it's in a base of oil. But it's also got the wax in there. But it's interesting when you are dealing with metallic particles such as silver or gold leaf powder, you want a base of wax to act as the carrier. And this I learned on my own intuitively, and then I went and got confirmation by going on the National Institute of Health website, and I found they had an abstract of a scientific study. They did a research experiment in which they coated the inside of food containers with beeswax, and in order to have a substrate upon which to adhere particles of silver, so as to serve as a sterilizing medium for the food inside that container and help preserve it against decomposition and spoilage. So I thought, perfect, I got confirmation. So I started immediately using beeswax, and there are different ways of melting it. You don't have to melt it in oil per se. You can melt it in something oily, such as cheese. You know, if you make macaroni and cheese and you melt the cheese into the macaroni, you can add beeswax and it will stick to the oil and diffuse and mix up with the oily cheese, or stick to the sticky cheese, let's put it that way. And you won't know it's there. And so there's no, depending on, if you don't put too much in. But if you put a lot in, you can actually taste the waxy, it leaves a waxy coating in your mouth because it's wax mixed with oil. The oil is acting as a distribution for the wax, and the wax is acting as an adherence, a kind of glue substrate, a gluey, like flypaper substrate for the silver particles or the gold leaf powder, so that the metallic fiber does not irritate the lining of the gut. Well, lo and behold, wax has another advantage, and that is to reduce irritation of the gut lining to other irritants, such as those that are dissolvable in various solutes, such as water or alcohol. Alcohol being an irritant, but the toxins related to withdrawal from alcoholism are also irritants. For instance, I learned recently that the reason why I was born with hyperammonemia, resulting in alcoholism because of candida overgrowth, because the ammonia feeds the candida, and ammonia is the waste product of parasites. We all have parasites to one degree or another in our body, especially in our colon and intestinal tract. And so normally the liver gets rid of the ammonia if it has the appropriate enzymes, enzymatic pathways to do so, to convert ammonia into urea, because the kidneys cannot get rid of ammonia. They have to work only with urea. So the liver works on behalf of the kidneys to do that conversion for it on its behalf. But if it can't, because I was born of an alcoholic mother fasting on a raw food vegan diet, then I'm congenitally set for life to be hyperammonemic. And that was accentuated, especially so when I underwent antifreeze poisoning over a decade ago. So I have to enhance my liver's conversion of ammonia into urea by taking potassium iodide in milligram dosages, hundreds of milligram dosages, or dozens of milligram dosages, to help my liver do its job, to speed up its metabolic rate, because it's sluggish, basically. It's not doing its job. And it works. It works pretty good, but you got to take a lot of potassium iodide to do that. Well, I learned recently the reason why I have this problem with this sensitivity to alcohol is because my mother was an alcoholic at the time that I was in her womb for the first 2 trimesters of my gestation period. Oops, I'm covering the microphone. I was in my mother's womb for the first, and she was fasting on this raw food, slightly spoiled vegan diet with a certain amount of alcohol content during the first 2 trimesters of my gestation with her. And so she was taxing her liver with alcohol, which means her liver was burdened and incapable of doing fully its job of eliminating other toxins, such as ammonia, which it's supposed to do all the time. So I was born in a sea, shall we say, an amniotic ocean of slightly intoxicated alcohol and ammonia. And so my liver did not develop the ability to get rid of ammonia, let alone alcohol, to process either one. Now, wax has an interesting property in blocking the reception of alcohol. It's very interesting. And that's not bad. But it's a mechanical process. But it also coats the stomach lining to protect it from other irritants, such as metallic particles. Reduced iron. If you look anywhere in bakery products, such as cornflakes cereal, you'll see it has reduced iron. And there are plenty of YouTube videos that will inform you on what reduced iron is by way of its extraction. They'll take the cornflakes, put it in a blender with water, pour that mixture into a Ziploc bag, tape a neodymium magnet to one side of the Ziploc on the outside, and you slosh it around, and then you pour out the contents, and then you gingerly turn the Ziploc inside out, and then you remove the magnet, and you'll find that what falls off from the inside of the Ziploc, on opposite to where the magnet had been positioned, are iron filings, of all things. And you can take a magnet and play with it, and once it dries, and scoot it around, put a magnet under the paper, and scoot it around, and it behaves like iron filings, because that's what it is. They legally get away with putting iron filings in our food by calling it reduced iron. If they call it anything else, it's something else. But if it's reduced iron, it's iron filings. So we're already ingesting an irritant, a mechanical irritant in our food. And wouldn't that be a cool way to get people to eat more and become obese? Oh, my God. and be self-centered about it, because iron gets you to focus on yourself. That's the whole point of iron, is to take care of number one, numero uno. So anyway, and iron, interestingly, along with silver and copper and zinc and a few other, beryllium, and I forget the sixth item, all help bone to form. So we need iron, but we could just as easily do without iron and use zinc or silver, for that matter, because they all have the same multiples of atomic radius to fit in the little notch, in the little gap in the matrix, in the spot that glues the hypoxyapatite, the calcium phosphate composition, with the, it's not cartilage, what is it called? Collagen, in order to form bone. Because bone is a matrix of hydroxyapatite, which is calcium phosphate, predominantly calcium phosphate, and collagen. And it helps, the silver, whatever, and the iron help the two form a union to form bone. Anywho, so wax is quite interesting because we can now take silver in humongous quantities. We don't have to limit ourselves to 20 parts per million, because that's a very unstable solution. It turns brown and it goes bad on you and it's no good anymore. But particles of silver last forever. If you sinter them off of the colloidal silver generator silver electrodes in vast quantities such that the silver water becomes murky, now you've got nano-sized particles of silver that have aggregated into sizable sized particles such that you can see them. You stir them up and you can see it create a cloud within the water, the distilled water that you used. Now you've got lots of silver, thousands of parts per million. And that's useful for me because if you want to deal with, for instance, botulism, you're going to need a lot of silver. You're going to need murky silver. And how do you administer it to the body? Well, when you work with beeswax, there are all kinds of available options. You can transfer your mixture to a new beaker that's used only for this process, because any molecules of beeswax cannot be in the same container that you use for making colloidal silver. It'll coat your electrodes and it'll block the process. You can clean them, but you have to use a perfectly clean beaker that's specifically used only for beeswax. And you take the 1 ounce beeswax bars and you rotate them and push them down onto the bottom of, let's say, a 1 or 2 quart Pyrex beaker. That's what I got. It's a straight edge beaker, and it leaves a residue on the bottom. So you put around the perimeter, not in the center, because that's where your magnetic stir magnet is going to be positioned, but around the center, around the perimeter, you put, I don't know, however many 1 ounce bars of beeswax you can fit standing up, like Stonehenge, maybe 5 or 6 or 4, let's say 4. And then you pour your murky silver water into this beaker, and you put it on the magnetic stir platform, and you put the magnetic stir magnet down there in the center, and you get it going, and it'll basically, after an hour or several hours, the particles of silver will ram themselves up against the sides of the bars of beeswax and adhere. And eventually the water will go pretty much clear for the most part. There might be a little murkiness, but hardly noticeable. And most of the silver will be coating the bars of beeswax, and you'll see it. And now you can pour out the water and gingerly take the bars of beeswax out and dry them out, or just let them sit there and dry out. You can turn it upside down and let it drip dry and dry out. And then you can remove them, and then using a potato peeler, you can peel off shavings of beeswax with the silver attached to one side of the shavings. Very carefully. You don't want to injure yourself. You might want to wear gloves to do this, garden gloves, leather gloves, because I tend to scrape my knuckles because it takes a lot of force to shave beeswax with a potato peeler. And now you've got shavings of beeswax with silver particles, and you can put this in a double boiler with oil to melt the beeswax. Now the silver particles are going to fall to the bottom. So as you cool this mixture with beeswax and oil and silver particles, you have to keep stirring constantly. You can't stop. You might want to put it in the freezer to chill it down a bit, but you're going to have to re-stir it to get the silver up off the bottom and suffused throughout the body of fluid. And hopefully it'll start to solidify thick like tapioca pudding. And at that point, you might be able to get away with stopping the stirring process manually with a spoon, or a knife or a fork, because now the silver may not fall to the bottom if it gets thick enough. And then you can put it back in the refrigerator or freezer to solidify completely. And then you take it out, and depending on how much beeswax you put in your oil, you'll have various consistencies that you can deal with at various temperatures. It might be a pudding, it might be more solid. For my needs, though, I need it to be pretty waxy. Waxy enough such that when I take like a spoonful of this stuff and put it in a batch of cookies, let's say I mix it first with the wet ingredients, maybe with the additional oil I'll add to make the cookie, and the egg and the water and sugar or whatever, before I add it to the flour. I want to keep everything stirred up. Before I pour the liquid portion into the dry portion of the cookie recipe, I'm going to want to stir up the liquid portion because the silver is going to fall right to the bottom again. So you can use this when making a cookie recipe, and you can have gold leaf powder in there and silver powder, and it'll serve as you need the wax to coat the stomach to help you deal with the particles of metal that you're putting in your cookie recipe, and then it's okay, it's safe. The wax will eventually leave your gut if you don't keep eating it, and take the silver with it and the gold. Anything that has not ionized, turned into ions of silver or ions of gold, because obviously you're ingesting an excess of silver and gold, or iron if you choose to put iron filings in your food, so that only a small portion of that solid matter, metallic matter, is going to actually turn into ions and get absorbed. But it's going to be like a slow release, time release, like a Timex, like time release vitamin C, for instance, in which it takes a while for it to be released. Well, it will. The entire time it's in your gastric system, it's going to have the opportunity for release, even when it's fermenting in the colon, due to fermentation bacteria and lactobacillus bacteria breaking it down also. So it's not just the stomach acidity that will break down and release ions of silver and ions of gold. Anywho, so that's my little talking head video on beeswax with relationship to alcoholism. It actually has a direct relationship all by itself with nothing else, except we need oil to act as a means of making use of wax so you don't get it stuck between your teeth or something, This way, when it's diffused in oil, it'll coat your teeth, but it'll come off because it's in a base of oil. So it can't stay there forever. And you won't even notice because it's diffused in the oil. So you won't even notice it's there, which is good. You shouldn't have to know that it's there. It should just do its job, and that's all you should think about is, oh, it must be doing its job. Otherwise, you wouldn't know it. Otherwise, except for the benefits. If you notice any benefits. If you don't notice any benefits, then don't take my word for it. Stop. Forget about it. Forget I told you anything. Don't believe me. I could be making this up. How do you know? Not except by your own experience. As Charlie Lutz would often say, experience is the best, superior to knowledge. And Saraswati told that to Adi Shankara. They had an argument. And Saraswati, the goddess of wisdom, took the position that experience is superior to knowledge, and Adi Shankara, a real literate smartass, took the position that an enlightened saint smartass who took the position, no, knowledge is superior to experience. Well, the guy was a celibate, but he didn't even know what sex was. And so he realized the error of his argument, And that's, you go look up the story. It's in the Vedas. I don't have to explain the rest of it. But he conceded to her that experience is superior to knowledge. Knowledge is just there to benefit, so you have an understanding and appreciation of what your experience is. So you don't throw it away thinking, what's it good for? But other than that, if you appreciate it on the merit of its own, of your own memory of what the experience is giving you, then you'll be convinced, and you won't think otherwise. So, if you have a consciousness for being receptive to that experience. If you don't have a consciousness, then knowledge is useful. Maybe. If you're convinced that the authority figure who's telling you it's good for you, you believe in them, like me. Otherwise, what do you know, right? And why should you believe me, right? Whatever.